Second question, why did you publicly violate Gavin Newsom's stay-at-home order? So let me give the context for this. I'll explain this tweet in a second for those of you who can see. For those of you who are just listening, I'll describe the tweet in a second as well, so you can, in effect, see it through your mind's eye, at least. So I got a notice maybe a month ago that an event, I'm going to be vague about this, an event that had contracted me to speak decided to cancel the event. And you might think, oh, it's because of COVID-19. They're just canceling the event because of safety concerns with the event. But no, it's actually the event. It's an event. It's an event later this year, but that event will be going on without me. And the reason that it'll be going on without me is because some of the leaders of the event found my public statements about COVID-19 offensive, and in particular this tweet. So this is a tweet, and the picture is of me. Now, by the way, I'm standing alone. I'm not in a crowd of people. It's me standing alone, smiling with a surfboard in the dark. And I'll read you the tweet. The tweet says, fascist Gavin Newsom has failed to protect nursing homes, plus forced countless Californians into getting high doses of COVID-19 by keeping them indoors. Now he's focusing on outlawing ... the beach. And then I say, proud to be an outlaw, enjoying bioluminescent night surfing. And then I have the hashtag that I like to use, safer outside. So just so you know, why is it dark and why do I have a surfboard? So very occasionally in certain oceans, including the Pacific Ocean, which borders many places, including where I live in Southern California, there's this phenomenon of bioluminescence. And it's just this unbelievable natural phenomenon where a certain kind of organism in the ocean makes the ocean kind of reddish during the day, but at night, it's actually this incredible neon, like light blue-green. I mean, it just seems completely unreal, actually. And when you move in the water, it somehow activates, and it's just so the water lights up. So even if it's pitch dark outside, there's this, it's like a glow stick, but a million times better. So Gavin Newsom's orders to not go to the beach and not to surf happened to coincide with this amazing phenomenon that, I may never see this again in my life to the degree that it was happening. And so just so you understand that. So I'll give more of my reasoning in a second, but that's just explaining the bioluminescent night surfing. So one more thing to say about this before I get to the events issue with this. I should say that everything I said here, so this was well over a month ago. I forget, I don't have the date with me, but in terms of failed to protect nursing homes, so a huge percentage of California deaths are from nursing homes. So from the beginning, I've been saying, if you're going to do isolation, do selective isolation with the most vulnerable. That at the time was considered sometimes an extreme view, and I got criticized for it. But I think basically everyone agrees now that selective isolation would have been much more rational. The main kind of selective isolation is isolating those who there's actual evidence that they are sick and therefore a demonstrable danger to others. But if you're going to isolate people where there's no evidence, then the only way that makes sense to do that at all is where they're actually the most vulnerable people, nursing homes being by far the most vulnerable place because of an elderly population and because of a tendency to be poorly ventilated and to have fairly close quarters. And then I said also force countless Californians into getting high doses of COVID-19 by keeping them indoors. We're seeing more and more and more confirmation of this idea that being indoors is really dangerous because you're getting high doses of the virus, likely in aerosolized form, which is the worst way to get it. So again, we're seeing more confirmation of what I was saying back then. And then we're seeing more and more confirmation that being outside, particularly with any kind of distance, is of virtually no risk. And of course, we have this phenomenon now, which happened after this event was canceled, of now there's this whole issue of, well, now it seems totally okay to have even very close mass gatherings if you are protesting a cause that's considered more important than protesting the lockdowns was. So I'm going to talk about that later this show. But I think we've seen that there's, in terms of just the facts of the matter and the way opinion is going, there's more and more vindication of the position I was taking. Okay, so why did the event cancel? Well, they said, you admit to violating orders put forth by the government focused on health and safety with which you disagree. So that's true. I did violate orders put forth by the government that were focused on health and safety, and they claimed to be focused on health and safety, and I definitely disagreed with them. And they said the supposedly right policy, and they said this is what companies do. If I, and here's the quote, disagree with a particular regulation, don't violate the rule, but work to change it, unquote. So I want to just note there's one switch here, which has gone from order to regulation. A regulation at least has some semblance of, okay, this is a clear law on the books that has been thought through, and there's been a real process behind it, whereas that's definitely not true with these orders at all. I think regulations can have the character of orders often as well because they're not actually deliberated in the law, and the regulators get sometimes an almost dictatorial power, but at least there's a process there. Here, there was not any kind of actual process that I think had any basis. And so this goes to, why did I do this? And so one question that I had when this event was canceled that is even more relevant now is, would you have applied this to the civil rights movement? So if I was in a civil rights protest and I was engaging in civil disobedience for a civil rights issue, a civil rights issue particularly that has to do with civil rights of racial minorities, which I think is a crucially important cause, has been in this country's history, and there are situations where it still is a crucial cause to be fought for, where when racial injustices occur, they're fortunately much less frequent than they were 40 years ago, but they still definitely occur. And so in both cases, we recognize, okay, civil disobedience is appropriate. So I was wondering, well, what if I had done civil disobedience? Would the event have canceled me? And I kind of doubted it. But I think civil disobedience was totally necessary here and is totally appropriate. So when I think of civil disobedience, I think of at least two goals. One is to bring attention to an unjust law, and two is to bring attention to an unconstitutional abuse of the law. That is, where the law is actually being violated by the enforcer of the law. And this is an incredibly common phenomenon in history. The fact that somebody is authorized to enforce the law doesn't mean that they're actually enforcing the law. And we have all sorts of procedures for challenging our executives when they're not actually enforcing the law properly. And one mechanism is civil disobedience, where we can say, in effect, look, I'm putting my freedom on the line because I believe this is wrong, and I'm willing to go to court to challenge this. And that's what I was doing here. And in the case of this situation with Gavin Newsom, I thought he was doing the second thing. So I thought he was violating the law, being lawless, just using very flimsy justification for forcing people to be in their homes indefinitely. And for reasons I've given on this podcast in the past, and you can listen to the one in particular with Ankar Gate to get into the details of what I think the government should do, I thought this is a complete misuse of government power. It was not at all the appropriate way to deal with this virus. And in fact, as I discussed in the Safer Outside episode with Daniel Gorbatenko, another Power Hour episode, it's actually harmful to people, even in terms of COVID-19, to force them to be indoors, because they're much more likely to get a high dose of the virus than if you allow them to be outside and encourage them to be outside, where they're either not going to get it or they're going to get a much lower dose version of it, which is something their body is much more able to fight off. So in any case, this is what I believed. I thought that our government officials were violating the law. I definitely thought they were acting unjustly. This was a crucial time in the history of freedom, and this was one mechanism at my disposal, and I chose to do it with surfing in particular because that was clearly an activity that made no sense to restrict. There's no science behind that. There's all the science against that. It's good to be outdoors. It's good for so many different reasons. And this was during the night, but usually it's during the day. And so you have sunlight, you have vitamin D. It's just the outdoor air has humidity, which is bad for the virus. So it has, I mentioned before, the diluting effect on the virus. I'm also not in a vulnerable population at all. I'm under 40 and and have no comorbidities whatsoever, no pre-existing conditions whatsoever. And so this was just a case where the law, it was unjust and it was lawless. And I thought somebody needed to say something about it. And you see with the current protests going on, which unfortunately have in many cases become riots, those are people who are saying, I think there's something wrong with the system. And my belief, as I'll discuss later, is I think there are certain things wrong with the system. I think many of the things people are protesting for are either completely unclear or completely counterproductive, such as any kind of defunding the police versus reform. I think that's going to hurt individuals immensely of all races, probably in particular Black individuals in poor neighborhoods. If police become disinterested in those areas or reluctant to police in those areas, I think most people in those areas very much want maybe even more police to be there. But in any case, we are now recognizing, hey, it's important that if you think the government is doing something wrong, that you stand up. And so I was doing it in a very healthy way, a very responsible way. I was willing to take the consequences, and I'm proud of that. And I would definitely do it again. And I've wondered since, would they have canceled me if I had participated in a highly non-distance protest against police brutality? So you have people who are violating all sorts of social distancing rules. Now, I think as long as they're outdoors, it's probably pretty low risk, but you could make an argument that if you're in super close quarters, there still is some risk, and that's being violated all the time. And it's interesting that nobody is taking that seriously. They're saying, oh, well, the value of the cause outweighs the danger. But for many of us, we thought, well, the cause of freedom, there, in a sense, you're opposing police brutality. That's the cause of freedom. That's the legitimate part of the protest anyway. Well, in terms of government basically imprisoning people in their homes indefinitely and stopping them from pursuing their livelihoods and preventing them from going to the doctor in some cases, I think that is a crucial violation of freedom. And so that's why I fought against it. And I find it offensive that people think that, there's nothing like for you to engage in civil disobedience for your freedom and for the freedom of 300 plus other million Americans, that's somehow unimportant. I thought it was very important. And in part, I thought it was important because so few people were standing up for it in the first place. That's the time when you really need to do something, is when everyone is not doing it, when everyone else is in the streets and where you're getting praised by everybody and getting pats on the back and you get all kinds of status. Yeah, there can be value in participating in something if you really believe in it. But I think the real time to do it is where very few other people are doing it. That's what I admire most. And that's what I aspire to most, is to stand up when it's actually the right thing, but it's not the popular thing. And as I mentioned I mentioned this on Twitter and I shared it on my newsletter. I know not all of you listening get my newsletter, but if you don't, go to alexepsteinlist.com and get it. I said, I would like to read an article about how police brutality and lockdowns are manifestations of the same evil. Insufficient legal restraints on government's coercive power. That power should only be used to protect freedom and must be exercised with the utmost care and caution. One more point about this, because this issue of getting an event canceled, I just want to make a point about this that I sometimes get from, and this is not by any means from the majority of people in the fossil fuel industry, but I have had it before. So I just want to comment on this. Sometimes I'll get the comment, like in this case, where, hey, we love that you're such an effective champion of the fossil fuel industry, but this other controversial thing, we don't want to be associated with that. This happened in 2016. If you look up Alex Epstein, Massachusetts Attorney General, you can see what happened then. And it had to do with, they were, I believe, completely unconstitutionally attacking ExxonMobil and me by extension in terms of free speech. And I had some very choice words for the Massachusetts Attorney General. And I remember somebody canceled something and said, like, oh, we don't want to be associated with this. And in effect, it's, well, we love your controversial views on our industry, but if you have this controversial view on free speech, or if you're calling somebody a fascist, like, we don't want to be connected with that. But I'm right to call them a fascist. What is a fascist? I mean, fascism is a system. It's a system where you supposedly own your own property and your own life, but the government has dictatorial control over it. That's really the core of fascism, that you supposedly own your property, but the government can control everything you do with it, so you don't really own it. Whereas socialism is, in its pure sense, the government owns everything. And it has financial responsibility for it, but it has control over it. And basically in fascism, it's just the government has control. And it's just nominal ownership of property, nominal ownership of your life. And that's what I felt like was happening with Gavin Newsom. Like, he's just saying, like, yeah, I can force you to stay in your home no matter what. I get to control all the property in California and get to decide where you go. And I thought it's definitely true with the Massachusetts Attorney General, where they're basically saying, no, you're not allowed to say what you think to Exxon about climate change because we think you're wrong. And in effect, we own you. So, but the thing I want to focus on is this is not like I think when people are saying, if you think like, hey, I love that Alex has this controversial view that favors me, but I don't like this controversial view about something else, that's okay. You can definitely believe that. But I think it's important that the reason that I have my views on fossil fuels, and I think the reason that they're very effective, is because they come from a place of an honest interest in human flourishing and human freedom. And that was how I went through the effort of figuring out the truth about fossil fuels and communicating it to people. And people can tell usually that it's coming from an honest place. It sounds very different than somebody who just happens to be in the industry. They've been there all their life and everyone knows kind of they have to say positive stuff about the industry. No, I came as a total outsider. I had no pre-existing connection, no financial connection. I came to all these conclusions before I had any relationship with anyone. But it's because I had this core belief in human flourishing and human freedom and thinking of everything in those terms. So yes, the same thing that leads me to the position that some people in the industry like about the industry being good, that's going to lead me to other controversial positions because we don't have a culture that is consistently focused on human flourishing and human freedom. We don't have that remotely. So of course, anyone is free to do anything they want in terms of events, but I just want to say, I hope people appreciate that the key to defend, if you do something controversial that's good, that people don't agree with, the key to championing that is to do so from an honest place of concern for human flourishing and human freedom. And that's going to lead you to some other controversial conclusions as well in today's culture. So I'm very grateful that there are a lot of events that really value that honesty and that don't mind that I say what I think on a number of things and that embrace that. And I'm also very grateful that now we have accelerators who help support my company's research and development efforts and our promotional efforts, and that helps immensely as well. And if you want to become one of those, you can go to industrialprogress.com/accelerate. So that is why I publicly violated the stay-at-home orders, because I believed it was a necessary act of civil disobedience.
Power Hour. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of energy. Power Hour. The antidote to shallow thinking about energy issues.